Welcome back, everyone. This is episode 198 of Pencils and Lipstick. I'm Kat Caldwell, your hostess, and I have with me Louis Jorstad. I always love having Louis on. How are you doing, Louis?
I am doing very well. I'm always excited to come on. This is really fun.
Yes, we always have a good time. We always actually have to like hit the record button because we'll just start talking about craft and all the things. And I'm having Louis on now. It is September. I think everyone's back in school by now. It's after Labor Day,
Mhm.
right? And you have a new book coming out. So tell us, first of all, what the book is called and what it is about.
Yeah, so the book, it, depending on when people are watching this, the book should be live tomorrow, which is really
Yay!
exciting. The book is called Beyond Book One. It is all about how to plan, write, and publish successful fictional series. Um, and not to get too nerdy, but I've been sitting on this book for probably about 3 years now, is when the title came to me. I was like, wow, that's a really like not to pat myself on the back, but I really like that title. And I was like, oh, I got to write a book for it. And I've just sat on it and sat on it. And I finally the planets aligned and it was finally time to get this book out. So I'm very excited to chat with you about it and share it with people. It's been a really fun week.
That's awesome. So this is the first one that's specifically about series, right? You have a couple other books out there that are for us writers and on craft. I recommend them a lot, like the 10-day outline book and a couple others. But is this one that the first that focuses on writing and planning a series?
Yeah. So my 10-day novelist series is all like process style guide.
Okay.
So, how to outline, how to write your first draft, how to edit. And they're all really focused on standalone novels just because the premise of the book wouldn't really work for a series because series are kind of their own beast.
Okay.
Um, and then I have a couple other books on things like character development, sort of broader
Sure.
craft. But again, they've always been kind of focused on standalones because once you introduce a series into the mix, things rapidly become more complicated. So part of why I'm really excited about this book is that one of the things people come to me and ask, I even have a chapter in the book dedicated to one of my writers who a long time ago came and was like, so all of this is really great, but like, how do you turn it into a trilogy?
Oh,
I'm like,
geez.
that's a great question. And so, yeah, series play by all of the same rules as a standalone novel, but also have their own rules and sort of their own best practices and quirks from like a storytelling perspective, like how you
Okay.
tell the story, but also just purely from a writing and publishing perspective. You're taking all the work that would go into a standalone novel and you're multiplying it and how you manage that process. Um, it can be difficult for writers
Yeah.
who've maybe written one novel and now they're trying to like, okay, well, how do I expand this out into
Yeah.
a whole series?
Right. So first, what in your experience, do people know that they're wanting to make a series more often than they come up against a series? Like I know for me, I decided to make a series out of my standalone, so that comes with all the other issues. But do you find people more like me or people more like, no, this is going to be a trilogy.
Mhm.
Now, how do I plan it?
I would say that a lot of people start out knowing they want to write a series just
Okay.
because I think series are so popular. They really dominate the publishing space, especially for indie authors. And
Yeah,
so
they
for
do.
writers who are sort of looking to that, looking towards when they're going to publish and when they're going to sort of start building their readership, I think a lot of them have it in the back of their head that like I really want this to be a series.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's any comfort for you, I absolutely have students who are in a similar place where they're like they've written a really good first book. It's gotten a lot of traction. Readers really like it, and they're asking for more. And they're sitting there like, how do I how do I turn this
How do
into a
I do
series? Like, I've written myself into all these corners. I plan for the story to be finished. Like, where do I go next? And that's actually where
Yeah,
the title of this book came from because it's beyond book one. Like,
right.
how do you take everything you've done and expand on it without driving yourself crazy and without kind of breaking the story, um,
Okay. Okay. Because
which is tricky.
so indie publishing's been around, I mean, forever, right? But still,
Mhm.
it really took off like 2011, I guess, with the Kindle. And then it sort of like it really started taking off what, maybe 7-ish years ago. Like,
Mhm.
so we're kind of a young industry, right? So if people are coming up in this, now all the information's out there that you should write a series because technically that's how you'll make money. Right? Like, as an indie author, it always comes down to that. So I guess you're right. And like science fiction has always been a series dominated field, I feel like, in possibly historical fiction. I grew up a lot on standalones. I'm much older than
Mhm.
you though. So like mostly like before in the 60s, 70s, I think besides science fiction and romance, there were a lot of standalones. So
Mhm.
for me it was like, oh, like series, like I didn't even know how you would do that because I hadn't really read them. Like I
Mhm.
get bored with them. So so when do you deal with that as well? Like people who might not have read series and now they're sort of in this business end and they're like, "Oh, I have to make this whole book into more." I guess especially if you want your super fans.
Mhm. So it's actually really interesting you say that because yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I talk about series as like, series are the norm, series are how authors sort of establish themselves. And that's true now, but like anything, sort of the publishing world ebbs and flows over time.
Right.
Standalones were much more common. Longer books were much more common,
Yeah.
40, 50 years ago, and things have gotten shorter. Our attention spans have gotten shorter, not to beat that dead horse everyone talks about, but it is kind of true.
Right.
Um, and it's been interesting to see how indie publishing especially has taken a lot of those concepts and actually taken concepts that are much older and has sort of revamped them for the modern sort of readership that they have.
Okay.
um, Something really interesting, this is not entirely to your question, I promise I'll circle back
That's
around,
all right.
but something kind of interesting that I found researching for this book is that series are not one thing. um,
Okay.
this is sort of my personal perspective on it. I'm sure other authors might view it in a slightly different lens, but have sort of drilled down to four different categories of series.
Oh,
Um, there are sequential series, which are, like The Lord of the Rings, like very classic, like, full length novels that tell one large overarching story across multiple books.
okay.
Um, I think that's what a lot of writers think of as like the default of what a series is.
Okay.
But there's also episodic series, which sort of fell out of popularity for a really long time and are sort of on an upswing right now, especially in the indie space. Um, and those would be stories that are, again, it's one large overarching story, but it's told more like a TV show where it's a bunch of really
Oh,
small installments. And you have room a little bit more for things like, side quests and side plots. Like you can deviate from that main plot a lot more often, um, because each entry, and then they won't mind if it was sort of like a slightly like left turn, character study.
right.
Then as long as you sort of cycle it back around to the main plot at the end, it's
Right.
it's a slightly more flexible way of writing a series. And that has become massively more popular in the indie space, even just in the last like 2 years. Who knows where it'll
Interesting.
be in 5.
Right. This is true. Before you get on the bandwagon, everyone.
Yeah. I mean, I think they're great. I think there's a lot of, I'm exploring writing more episodic series myself just because I think they're really fascinating from a storytelling perspective, but that's
Hmm.
a whole other chat.
Yeah.
But and then the last two are static series, really common in thrillers and mysteries where,
Okay.
like Jack Reacher, it's every book is standalone. It's a complete story, but it's the same sort of general world and protagonist. The protagonist just doesn't change that much across each book. They change in
Hmm.
some ways, things will sort of come back up. They'll learn some lessons, they'll develop some relationships, but it's not like a quote unquote traditional trilogy or a sequential trilogy where you're charting this whole character journey across a bunch of books. Um,
Right.
Static series are just that. They're much more static. And then the last one that's sort of the weird third cousin, if like twice removed, are anthology series, which are series that do not have common protagonists, do not have an overarching plot. They are connected by some other concept. So that could be a common world, very common in romance, because you finish a romance novel, you're
Yeah.
not going to like, you have to give a happily ever after or something in that vein.
It's
Like,
like the small town is the character or something
exactly.
like
Yeah. And so in a romance series, I like to use the Bridgerton series, for example, just because it's sort of in our brain space right now because of the
yeah.
Netflix show. But each book focuses on a different sibling in the family. So you're in the same world, you're in the, you sort of, you know, the general constraints of this story, but it's a different story every time and a different set of characters every time. And that's a totally valid type of series that if your perception of series is like Lord of the Rings trilogy, you might never really think about because it seems sort of disjointed, but you can still tell like an incredibly satisfying story that way.
Right. They're all very different.
They're all very different. Yeah, it's really fascinating, but they all sort of fulfill that core um, sort of purpose of a series, which is that there has to be a compelling reason and a compelling connection between each book.
Hmm.
Um, which is why I say that with a series, all the same rules of a standalone novel apply. Every one of your series, books like book one, book two, book three, need to be good novels in their own right. They need to have a complete story. They need to have strong pacing and have interesting characters. But depending on the type of series you're writing, you also have to figure out what that overarching concept will be, whether that's going to be a
Right.
big overarching plot or just the same characters or the same world that makes readers who finish book one say, oh, I absolutely need to read book two. It is the natural continuation of this
Yeah.
series, which is
And
tricky. It's
it is
complicated.
tricky. It is because I get the easiest way to do that, I would assume, is to know from book one that you so you can put in like certain characters at least, if not like nuggets. Like I guess the most satisfying and the most amazing ones is when the writer puts something in the beginning that you're okay with them not having figured out by the end of the book somehow, and yet they still fix it by the like they like resolve it by the end of the third or fourth or whatever book, and yet you're not dissatisfied. Like that to me is one of the most amazing things that some writers like. I don't know how they do that.
So what I think you're sort of describing here is something called catharsis, which is that like emotional rush you get at the end of a story. That's what makes it feel satisfying. So when you finish a really good novel and you just like it's hard to describe because it's just that it's like tightness in your chest. You're
Yeah.
excited, you're hyped up. Um, that's really the goal there. And so yeah, with a series, you have that added element of you need to create that catharsis at the end of each book, but you also need to leave plot threads open-ended so that readers have a reason to keep going. And so you can
Yeah.
create an even bigger sense of catharsis at the end. You
Right.
by setting up things in book one that you then finally pay off in book three, that's a really powerful thing. Regardless of what series type you're writing,
Right.
even in
Right.
something like Jack Reacher or the James Bond books, like you could drop a little hint or a little nugget in book one that you don't bring back up until book 12. um, it's sort of you're rewarding readers for sticking with you.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. So how do you do that? I mean, it's interesting. I saw a meme of like, somebody crying basically and saying no because it in the top of it was like when I realized I have to take the story from my head to the actual paper,
Mhm,
because a lot of times we have very vivid imaginations as writers. We think we know the whole story, right? And then you you don't, right? Like it's impossible to know everything that actually has to happen because things are going to come up, especially like let's just say trilogy.
mhm.
That's what 80 times 3. What is that? 24,000 words, like 2400, 2040,000 words, whatever. I can't do math. Okay, it's a lot of words. So that's and the characters that you have to have and the plot holes that you have to, and like you just said, you can't really have a cliffhanger, right? Like it
Mhm.
has to have open, that's different. Open threads is different than a cliffhanger. You still have to end it, which is sometimes the worst the hardest thing to do. You have to have climax. Do you have to have a climax that's like a series climax and a climax per book? Like,
Yes.
oh my gosh.
Yeah, not to really stress you out about the thought of turning
Now
your
I'm
book into a
I'm
series,
like
but
tearing
yes.
my hair out at this point.
Um, so yeah, so the basic concept. So this is something I go into way more detail in the book,
Yes.
like more than I could ever explain in this call, but
Right.
I'll kind of give you the as much as I can. Um, the idea is that you don't want to leave. Well, okay, I don't want to say that as an absolute. There are definitely
Okay.
instances where leaving a cliffhanger could be the right move, but I
Mm,
would caution against doing that often. And doing it without a lot of care on why you're doing it. Like a cliffhanger
okay.
is a very powerful tool, but it also is a very delicate one that like you want to use in moderation. Um, and so for a series, you still, you need that big finale at the end of each book. Um, but I describe it as you also want to open a loop at the end. So
Okay.
if you're familiar with story structure, you're going to have those big turning points in the story. Um, and there's going to be that central conflict in each book.
Mm,
Um, that all needs to be the case in a series. And by resolving that central conflict for each book, that's how you create that satisfying cathartic finale.
okay.
But then you have that sort of that falling action or that resolution after the finale where you have space to open a loop. So you're sort of like, oh, everyone sigh of relief. We've beat the conflict. Things are done. Oh wait, but what about this? Or, for instance, something like The Hunger Games, that
Yeah.
first book is very much a complete story. They survive the games, they get out, they go home, but the story kind of opens a loop at the end of look how much conflict is now here. Like, look at how unstable things are and how much their world has changed because of their defiance at the end of the games. There's trouble brewing. And
Yes.
that's where book two comes in. You
And
would
I
be
think,
doing the same thing.
sorry, my mic. I think really that loop is only opened by Haymitch, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's just the little comments he makes. So you can open a loop quite quietly.
Mm-hmm.
Like because you said, as you said, it could have been a standalone sort of. You'd still have people clamoring for more, right? As they want more from Mr. Snow and everything. But I think it like that loop is really only him saying, "Do you really think this is over?" Like,
Mm-hmm.
come
Yeah.
on.
There's a lot of really like gentle ways you can do it, and you can be more aggressive about it. For instance, not to like just focus on trilogies, but trilogies above and beyond most other types of series have a very like consistent cadence.
Mm,
Um, and I like to use Star Wars as an example just because again, everyone's familiar with it.
right.
But the second Star Wars movie ends on not a cliffhanger. Like Luke isn't left hanging off, hanging in space, like about to die, and we just cut to black and that's all we get. Like we know that he gets saved. Like we know that, Han is taken away, Luke is not dead, but like we're sort of on a low note. Um, that is a more aggressive sort of open loop because the open loop isn't, well, stuff might pop off soon. The open loop is our heroes just got their shins kicked. Like
Yeah.
we have some stuff to deal with in the next story. So it's a range, like all things, and it depends on the specifics of your story, how
Okay.
aggressive you want to be. Um, but what's cool is, and so sort of tying way back to the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned that you already have a book and you're sort of like, well, how do I expand it into a series? And a lot of what we've been talking about in terms of like opening that loop and that overarching plot is specific to like sequential or episodic series.
Okay.
But there's also always the possibility of writing a static or an anthology series, which is a whole nother set of possibilities. Um, Obviously I don't know the exact specifics of your book, but depending on what your book is like, if it is a really complete story, it might be that you're not maybe writing book two as a continuation of that story. Maybe you're writing a separate adventure that protagonist has, or you're writing an adventure that another character from that first book has, but it's a different protagonist, it's a different story. The sort of the fine art of it is like
Yeah.
how you mesh that together in a way where readers are willing to come along with you for that journey, where they don't feel like this is just sort of random books that you shove together, that like it feels cohesive.
I think I'll need your book. Anyways, so with Beyond Book One, is this like a sort of in-depth book where we're sort of we need a pencil and we're going alongside as we're reading, kind of like your other books where you're just like, all right, here are my ideas? Or is this like a read and then work out your series after we've read the whole book?
So yeah, if anyone watching this, and I know you're familiar, are familiar with my 10-day novelist series,
Mhm.
those books are very process oriented. So like as you read, you're probably pausing a lot to go do stuff, because I'm saying like, okay, at this point, take some time to do XYZ and then come back and we're going to continue and do XYZ. Beyond Book One is actually part of a separate series that I'm writing called the Writer's Craft series. And there are two other books in it right now, Write Your Hero and Mastering Character Arcs. And those books are still very action oriented. Like
Mhm.
I would love for people to be reading and like taking notes and like getting ideas as they go. Um, but they're more of like a deep dive into some aspect of the story craft. So
Mm.
for instance, Beyond Book One is going to like take you through a deep dive of those different types of series I talked about, like how they compare, work through some case studies of like what that looks like in action, what are the kind of pitfalls and dangers of each one, what are the benefits of each one. And then it's going to kind of circle around to saying like, okay, based on that sort of base of knowledge that you now have, how can you figure out what type of series fits the story you're trying to tell? And
Right.
then speaking to you specifically, there's a whole chapter on what do you do if you already have a novel and want to expand it into a series? Like, how do you approach that
How do
process?
you approach that? Yeah.
Yeah. And so it sort of goes through all of that. There's a chapter in there on like publishing a series. How is publishing a series different than a standalone? What do you need to
Okay.
think about in terms of like titles and covers and promotion and pricing and like should you do a box set? The answer is no. Should you like all these different things that are different than
Yeah.
standalones. Um, Honestly, because so many of the resources that I've found over the years for writers are written as if they're assuming you're writing a standalone. And a lot of
Yeah.
writers are trying to like extrapolate that out into like, okay, well, how does that apply to a series?
Right.
Um, and now when people come to me and say like, well, I read all this stuff, but like, how does it apply to a series? I can be like, I got you.
Yes. Yeah.
Don't guess. Like, here is how it applies to a series. So
So, as far as marketing goes, I think the last, gosh, what year is this year? 8 years, people have been saying give your first book away for free, which is hard to do when you just have the one book out of your series, or maybe just the two, like depending on how
mhm.
you've decided to do that, right? Do you think that's still a thing, or are you going to recommend people write like a prequel, or like how do you think that works as far as, like, let's say we're right now thinking of writing a series and we want to like be very organized, as I am not, but if we were going to like pretend, what would you recommend they I don't know, that they do, or just this is how marketing in the indie world is?
Mhm. So I think the sort of perma-free first book is a very valid strategy. And
Mhm.
same with a lot of authors will just discount their first book. The first book is 99 cents and the rest is 3.99 or 4.99 or whatever. Um, but that's not the only way. The big thing, at least in my opinion, to think about when you are thinking about the like promotion side of a series is that your biggest goal is to encourage read through. So,
Mhm.
for anyone not familiar with that as a term, read through is how many readers who read book one make it all the way to the last book in your series. So, if we're working with a trilogy, how many, read book three? Or if you have 6 books, how many read book six?
Okay.
Um, and there is your sort of series read through, which is how many from book one make it to the last book. There's also individual, like if you're looking at your series read through and it's really low, like 50% is considered kind of the benchmark you want to hit.
Mm,
If you're down in like
really?
the 10% range, it might not be that like, oh, my whole series is terrible, it's all falling apart. It might be that one specific book they're dropping off on. And then you can look like, okay, how many people who read book one buy book two? Okay, how many who read book two buy book three? And somewhere along there, you'll see a sudden outlier and be like, oh,
Something
everything's
happened.
great. It's just no one's buying book four for some reason. Like maybe my blurb is weird. Like maybe my cover isn't working. Um, there's a lot of little things you can like tweak and adjust that might have nothing to do with the story. Like the story might be awesome. It's just there's some little piece that you need to sort of tweak. Um, Again, that's a much longer conversation. We might have to
Yeah.
come back for
I
that
mean, and
one.
that's always the problem with the indie world, right? It's like it could be a lot of different things,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm sure you touch on in the book beyond book one, but really the most important is that the series is cohesive, right? And that it continues, that it's written in a way that continues to make people want to buy the next one. Like so that, I mean, when I was a kid, you would end the season of the television season would end in May. You had to wait till September for it
Mm-hmm.
to start again. There was no binge watching back then. That's how old I am. So you want that anticipation, right? And that really has to do with how you've structured the story. So would you recommend, I mean, there are lots of people like me, but I guess the better way to do it would be to really not be a pantser, but to be a planner for a series.
Yeah, and I always feel weird saying that because I want to respect people's writing process. Like we're all
Right.
different, and whatever is going to help you write the book is the most important thing. Um, but for a series, I do really strongly recommend having at least some plan in place.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a huge plotter. Like I'm the guy with like index cards and sticky notes on the wall. I look like a crazy person. Like I'm a planner at heart. But you don't necessarily have to be like me where you've literally plotted out every scene in a 6 book series at length. That might be a little much. But even for those of you out there who are pantsers, even if you don't want to like plot out the whole series, depending on what type of series you're writing, again, that's a complicating factor of like, if you're writing a sequential trilogy like The Lord of the Rings, how you do this will be different than if you're
Right.
writing like a static, 12 book series like Jack Reacher. But knowing your overarching concept.
Mm-hmm.
If you are writing a sequential trilogy, like what is that overarching plot for the whole book, and how are you going to end that last book? Because even if you don't really know what happens in the middle, you
Interesting.
kind of need to know what you're building towards
Right.
to prevent yourself from sort of falling off. Bless George
Yeah.
R. R. Martin,
Yeah.
that book's never coming out. Like it's
Right.
because he's written an amazing, incredibly deep, complicated series, and now he's sort of staring at it like, now how the hell am I gonna wrap this all together? And that's hard. And even
That
if you're
would
writing
be,
a
yeah. That
much
would be
simpler story,
paralyzing.
yeah. Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
if you don't know what it is and now you have fan bases, there's no way you're going to satisfy everybody. Like
No.
there's no way. You have to have that confidence. Like J.K.
Mm-hmm.
Rowling needed to know what that end battle scene was going to be and how
Mm-hmm.
much we were going to doubt what's his face? What is his name? And like whether he was going to give up Harry or not. Like
Mm-hmm.
something. She must have had some sort of idea, I mean, because it's the usual good and evil, like
Yeah.
okay, it could be so many different things, but I think you're right. Like if you could write yourself into a corner if you don't know what that
Mm-hmm.
ending is.
And I mean, even if you manage to pull it all off, when, at least for me and for a lot of the students that I work with, when you are stuck in like the first draft of book two and you're like, everything's falling apart, my life is in shambles, I haven't showered in 4 days, like when life just looks
Yes.
bleak, knowing what you're working towards,
Right.
like being able to step back and imagine, like, okay, it might not happen in this book, it might not happen in the next book, maybe you're writing 4 or 5 book series, but I know where the story is going. and I'm
Hmm.
excited about that ending, that can that can do a tremendous amount to kind of like propel you through
Right.
when you are just like really thinking about giving up on a book. Especially if you're publishing as you go. I love that you mentioned like when you have a readership, it just gets massively more complicated. Um, because yeah, like there's a lot to be said for listening to your readers and trying to adapt and account for what they're excited about. If you write books 1 and 2 and there's like a throwaway side character that you don't think much about, but readers are just foaming at the mouth, like we
Right.
love, Jim Bob over there, like we want more of that. It might be worth working them into the story a little bit more. But at the same time, as the author, you have to be comfortable saying, I'm giving you not necessarily the story you're asking for, but the story you actually want, which
Yeah.
sounds very self-important, but you are in charge of the boat. And if you don't know where you're headed and you're just sort of being pulled in every direction, that can be very overwhelming very
Yeah.
quickly.
I mean, imagine how many people wanted her to stick Katniss to go with Gale, and
Exactly.
she
Yeah.
said no. Like, and we were
Nope.
all, some of us were confused, but that's
I'm
okay.
still confused.
Like,
Why
why
the boy
Peeta?
is named after bread? I'm very
I know.
confused.
What is this? But so one last question I have for you, because I read this somewhere. I will say that. Um, that mentioned in a series, it's usually book two, because as you look at it, so what it, not the episodic series, but the, like the trilogy series, or the
Mhm.
series that, and a lot of series are like longer than that now, right? 4, 5, 6 books. But it's really following, what's that called again? The series that like
The
follows a
sequential
whole, the
series.
sequential series.
Yeah.
So this person said that it's usually book two, because that's the uphill of like
Mhm.
really setting more scene. Like the um the first book, you really had to introduce everybody, and something had to push the protagonist into, you know, getting off their bum, and like walking into the world, right? And now the second book is like technically the most boring, because it's
Mhm.
still setting up. Do you agree with that? Because I was shocked by that statement.
Yeah, I call them the book two lows.
Really? Okay.
Book twos can just drag. They're usually really long because a lot has to happen, but they can just be the most stale, depressing books
Interesting.
because they also so again,
They got to end at the like low point, right?
at
Like
the
you
low
were
point,
talking about
yeah.
with Star Wars.
So
Oh,
trilogies are sort of their own beast because it is such an established like way. There's a very established way of writing a trilogy,
okay.
like above and beyond just like a 4 book series or a duology or
Okay.
what have you.
Okay.
Those each have their own quirks, but for a trilogy especially, yeah, the book two lows are very real,
Interesting.
and there isn't really a way around it. Like it's kind of just a fact of the format. But with that said, there is a way to do it well and kind of mitigate those lows. And it really just ties back around to like good story craft.
Okay.
You know, that book two still needs to be a compelling, interesting story. And really it needs to be pretty tight. I always feel like a bit of a Grinch doing this, but I have some authors I work with where they get into their book two and they're just throwing in every scene. They're like, we're gonna have this side character and we're gonna do this thing. And I'm just like, stop.
Yes.
Let's like pull back. I hate doing it because they're all interesting, cool ideas, but just like any other book, like the tighter you can make it, the more focused you can make it around that, central conflict of that book, the more likely readers are going to stick with you. And it's not going to kind of
Mm,
lose the thread because, again, you're trying to build up to that catharsis. Even if you're going to end on a low note at the end of book two to sort of lead into book three, there's still ways to do it where readers get to the end and they're like, no, like they're
yeah.
hyped up in a negative way, but like in a way that's addictive. Like they want to know what happens next. They're like, I have to see, do we get Han out of the carbonite? Like, does what
Yeah.
happens to his arm? It's yeah, it's definitely an art form. But yeah, that book too low is very real.
Okay.
I would wholeheartedly agree on that.
That's interesting. So I would assume though that once you know something, like that's also giving you the ability to mitigate that, to make it
Mhm.
condense, right? To follow all these rules as well. Well, that is awesome. So this Beyond Book One comes out, as far as this podcast comes out, tomorrow, September 12th.
Mhm.
But people can pre-order, right?
Yeah. So if someone's watching this like Monday morning, yeah, pre-order should be live unless I have done something horribly wrong. Pre-order should be live. And yeah, book comes out fully on the 12th. And I would be so honored if people picked it up. I am so excited about, like, as you can tell, I could just geek out about this kind of stuff for hours and hours. It's really bless my boyfriend putting up with my nonsense. He's like, please go on podcasts, talk about this to other
Please go.
people. Can we talk about the weather?
Yes. How about we paint?
Anything.
I don't know.
Yeah.
And he's like complete opposite of writing, right? So it's probably like, I'm done.
Yeah, he's a web developer. So he's very mathy. Like we
Like
were
my
sitting there trying to figure
husband.
out math, and I'm just like, I am not a
He'd be
math
like, yeah.
guy. Yeah,
We're both
exactly.
staring at the screen. How many words is it? Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's a lot
Exactly.
of words. That's what it is. So when people pick up this book, and I always recommend your other books as well, the 10-day series. What if they read it and they're like, okay, that's great, Lewis. Now I need more help because I need like a therapist or Lewis Jorstad to like pretend be my book therapist. Do you have anywhere else that they can go to like figure this out verbally and with somebody, mostly you?
Yeah, so I obviously anyone who wants to just sort of like follow from afar and like see what I have going on, I have a lot of resources on my website, thenovelsmithy.com. But for anyone who wants to like who's looking at this and they have their book and they're like, how do I turn this into a series? Like, how do I make my book to not suck? And wants to
Yes.
work on that a little more closely, I have a writing membership called The Forge, where not only do we have sort of our like central like roadmap,
Okay.
course for writers that kind of takes you by the hand and gives you sort of guidance for each stage of the writing process, from like your initial idea all the way up to publishing and like building your readership. But we also have a really really awesome community of other authors, and I'm there as well. So there's a lot of editorial support. We have office hours where you can come and like exactly like this, like talk through your story with me, and hot seats where every so often I'll sit down with one person in particular and we'll have like an hour long triage session for like whatever they've got going on. It's a cool place. And yeah, anyone who's interested in that, I would be so thrilled to get to meet y'all.
And they can find more information about the Forge at thenovelsmithy.com, right?
Yes, yeah, they should
Awesome.
find links and everything they need there.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I'm really excited about Beyond Book One. I'll be picking it up, and I encourage you guys to hit the links in the show notes below. If you're driving, of course, you can find everything at thenovelsmithy.com, but the links will be below, and you can follow Lewis on social media as well. And yeah, I'm sure he'll come back soon, and we'll be talking about more things because as you can tell, we can geek out about the craft for a long time.
So long, just days.
Just forever. We're saving our partners, okay? We're saving those.
Yeah,
Thank
I'm
you.
saving my relationship.
Exactly. Thanks so much for coming on.
Absolutely.